I don't care if you're on lunch break, fix it now, Brandon barked, slapping a printout on my desk like he was delivering the Ten Commandments. It was the third time this month he'd summoned me mid-bite to clean up a payroll mess from his wife Sydney, a social media coordinator whose main talent seemed to be screwing up timesheets and quoting Tony Robbins unironically. I'm Garrett Caldwell, 48 years old, and I've been dealing with this nonsense for way too long. The spreadsheet was a disaster again. 8 hours logged on a day Sydney was out sick. I stared at the numbers and muttered under my breath, did she work telepathically, or was this just another miracle of executive nepotism? Brandon didn't wait for a reply. He never did. He strutted off like he'd just delivered a keynote at some tech startup, leaving the scent of overpriced cologne and entitlement in his wake. I sighed, closed my half-eaten sandwich, and got back to work. Again. No thank you. No context. Just that simmering, unspoken expectation that Garrett will handle it. He always does. You know what really gets me? In the Navy, if someone screwed up this bad, they'd be scrubbing decks until they learned proper accountability. But here at Phoenix Financial Solutions, incompetence gets rewarded as long as you're sleeping with the right person. For the record, this wasn't in my job description. I'm a senior financial analyst, not an unpaid babysitter for Brandon's pack of professional toddlers. I'd been at this company for 11 years, longer than the standing desks, the kombucha fridge, and the so-called chief innovation officer. I trained new hires, smoothed client meltdowns, and maintained back-end reporting systems no one else understood. But ever since Brandon took over the department 16 months ago, it was like I'd become invisible until something went wrong. 20 years in the Navy taught me a lot about leadership, real leadership. Not this fake motivational poster garbage Brandon peddled. In the service, you earned respect through competence, not connections. You led by example, not by throwing tantrums when your wife couldn't figure out basic data entry. The first time Brandon dismissed me in front of everyone during a Monday stand-up, I blinked twice and said nothing. Pick your battles, my old chief petty officer used to say. The third time, I took a screenshot of his Slack rant and saved it to a private folder labeled just in case. By month 6, I was cataloging every backdated timesheet, every schedule he edited after hours, every passive-aggressive per my last email buried in corporate doublespeak. Here's the thing about Brandon. He didn't even hide it. He had this warped philosophy he called agile leadership. That's how he justified micromanaging staff during meetings, forcing unpaid overtime, and humiliating underperformers with what he charmingly called growth opportunities. HR didn't bat an eye. They called it modern management. I called it what it was, a 31-year-old kid drunk on power he never earned. Brandon Hayes wasn't just any nepotism hire. He was the son-in-law of our VP of marketing, married to Sydney about 6 months before mysteriously landing this management position. No prior experience running a department, no financial background, just an MBA from a party school and connections that mattered more than competence. Let me paint you a picture of what agile leadership looked like in practice. Last month, Brandon decided our team needed to embrace disruption by implementing a new productivity tracking system. Translation: he wanted to micromanage our bathroom breaks. The system crashed on day 2, taking half our client reports with it. Guess who stayed until midnight recovering the data? Not Brandon, not Sydney, me. And when the client called Monday morning wondering where their quarterly analysis was, Brandon threw me under the bus in front of everyone, claiming I'd failed to properly manage the transition. That's when I started keeping detailed notes. Not just the obvious stuff, the overtime violations, the favoritism, the complete incompetence, but the patterns. How Brandon would conveniently find urgent projects whenever I requested time off. How Sydney's mistakes somehow became teaching moments while mine became performance concerns. How every team meeting turned into the Brandon show with him spouting buzzwords he'd learned from whatever business podcast was trending that week. You have to understand, I didn't wake up one morning planning to take down my boss. I'm not some disgruntled employee looking for a payday. I'm a guy who spent 2 decades serving his country, who understands what real leadership looks like, watching some entitled kid cosplay as a manager while making everyone else's life miserable. The breaking point came during our quarterly review cycle. Brandon had the audacity to mark me as needs improvement in the category of adaptability to change. This from a guy whose biggest change management challenge was remembering his wife's login password. He wrote that I seemed resistant to new methodologies and struggled with collaborative feedback integration. Translation: I'd questioned his decision to have our team use a project management app designed for wedding planners. I'd also had the nerve to point out that his streamlined reporting process had actually doubled our workload while cutting our accuracy in half. But here's what really burned me up. The same review praised Sydney for her innovative approaches to data visualization. Her innovative approach was using Comic Sans font on financial reports and adding emoji to client presentations. I'm not making this up. She actually sent a quarterly profit analysis to our biggest client with a smiley face next to the revenue numbers. That night, I sat in my truck in the company parking lot, staring at that performance review. 20 years of military service, commendations for excellence, leadership roles that actually mattered. And now some kid who couldn't tie his shoes without his daddy-in-law's help was questioning my adaptability. That's when I made the decision to start documenting everything, not just casually saving emails, but building a real case file. In the Navy, we called it CYA, cover your assets. When you're dealing with someone who plays fast and loose with regulations, you better have your paperwork in order. Last Friday was when everything changed. I was staying late to finish month-end reconciliation because, surprise, surprise, Sydney forgot to log a whole week of work. Someone had to clean it up, and Brandon made it crystal clear that someone was me. While double-checking time entries in the shared admin platform, I saw Brandon's username pop up. He was editing time cards at 9:48 p.m. for entries dated 2 weeks back. Now, in any legitimate business, timesheet adjustments require supervisor approval and documentation. But Brandon was just going in and changing numbers like he was playing SimCity. I didn't say a word. I just opened my screen recording software and started capturing everything. 20 years of military training taught me one thing. When someone's violating protocol, you document it. You don't confront, you don't escalate, you gather evidence. What I found made my blood boil. Brandon wasn't just fixing Sydney's mistakes, he was systematically inflating her hours while reducing overtime calculations for the rest of us. He'd mark her 6-hour days as 8 hours, then split the difference across 3 other employees to keep the departmental totals looking normal. Pure wage theft, dressed up as administrative efficiency. I captured it all. Screenshots, timestamps, the whole digital paper trail. Then I cross-referenced it with our actual project deliverables. You know what I found? On days Sydney supposedly worked 8 hours, her output was maybe 2 hours worth of actual work. Meanwhile, guys like me and Caleb Rodriguez were logging 10-hour days but only getting paid for 8 because Brandon was optimizing our efficiency metrics. The next morning, I walked in early, my armor of caffeine and military-trained patience fully loaded. Sydney was already there, fumbling with the copier like it owed her money. She gave me a sheepish wave, then scurried off, probably to forget another password. I booted up my laptop, opened the error-riddled payroll spreadsheet, and began quietly fixing what should have been flagged in the first place. I barely heard the morning stand-up begin behind me until Brandon said my name with that false, cheerful voice he used when he was about to throw someone under the bus. "Let's all give Garrett a round of applause," he smirked, clapping like a toddler who'd just seen fireworks. He saved us again from another little Sydney blunder. Real team player. The room gave an awkward chuckle, which encouraged him to continue. I could feel it coming. That moment when a small man with a little power decides to flex just because he can. I think it's time Garrett took a little break. A week off. Unpaid, of course. Mental refresh. Reset that attitude. I blinked. Brandon grinned like he'd just solved world peace. I glanced around the room. Slack-jawed silence. Even Sydney looked like she wanted to disappear into the printer. In that moment, I realized Brandon had just made the biggest tactical error of his short, unimpressive career. 20 years in the Navy, and I'd never seen an officer this stupid. You don't discipline someone in public without documentation, without cause, without following proper procedures. But Brandon wasn't a real leader. He was a kid playing dress-up in daddy's clothes, and he'd just painted a target on his own back. I didn't say a word, but my hand under the desk tapped record on my phone. Voice memo captured. Timestamp logged. Game quietly, irrevocably on. "Of course," he added. "This is optional if he wants to explore other opportunities entirely." That's when I knew for certain. This wasn't about performance or attitude or any of the corporate buzzwords Brandon loved to throw around. This was retaliation, pure and simple. He'd caught wind that I was asking questions about timesheet irregularities, and now he was trying to silence me the only way his limited imagination could conceive. What Brandon didn't understand, what guys like him never understand, Weixiao, is that real strength doesn't come from throwing your weight around. It comes from preparation, patience, and knowing exactly when to strike. He thought he was disciplining a problem employee. What he was actually doing was confessing to federal labor violations in front of a room full of witnesses. I stood up slowly, gathering my laptop like I was heading to a routine meeting. No drama, no outburst, just the calm professionalism that 2 decades of military service had drilled into my bones. "Everything okay?" whispered Paige from billing. I smiled, a quiet, steady smile that said, "You have no idea how okay this is about to be," and walked out. Straight past the vending machines, past Brandon still monologuing about proactive emotional recalibration, and into my cubicle where I sat down and opened the voice memo app on my phone. Playback. Garrett's taking a week of unpaid leave or he can explore other opportunities entirely. Crystal clear, no background noise. His voice sounded like the opening line of a deposition. In the Navy, we had a saying, "Loose lips sink ships." Brandon had just torpedoed his own vessel and he was too arrogant to realize it. I copied the file to my encrypted cloud storage and then, without drama or delay, opened Outlook. New message. Recipients. Payroll, HR, legal alias. Subject line. Requesting confirmation of employment status change. Body. Per Brandon Hayes' directive during today's team meeting, I've been instructed to take 1 week of unpaid leave or face termination. Voice recording of the directive is attached. Please confirm the legality and policy compliance of this action, as well as the proper documentation procedures for involuntary unpaid leave. I want to ensure I'm following all company protocols correctly. Garrett Caldwell. I attached the audio file, hit send, then logged out of company Slack and went to lunch. Time to let the grown-ups sort this mess out. By the time I got back from lunch, there were 3 replies waiting in my inbox. Payroll. We are unable to enforce any unpaid leave without documented HR approval and proper cause documentation. Legal autoresponder. Your message has been received and forwarded to appropriate counsel. If this is time-sensitive, contact redacted. HR. Nothing. Complete radio silence, which told me everything I needed to know. They were scrambling, probably calling Brandon into a side room right now to ask what the hell he thought he was doing. In the military, when legal gets involved, heads start rolling fast. Corporate America moves slower, but the principle's the same. Brandon didn't show up for the afternoon team call. At 3:17 p.m., I watched him pace by my cubicle twice like a caged animal who'd just realized the door was locked from the outside. He didn't speak, but his jaw was tight and his clipboard was clenched like he was trying to manifest a law degree through sheer willpower. At 4:06 p.m., I got a Slack ping from Sydney. Just an emoji, wide eyes, followed by, "Yo, WTF, was that this morning?" I didn't respond. Instead, I spent the next hour doing what any good analyst does, digging deeper into the data. I pulled up Excel logs from March, where Brandon manually adjusted 4 entries to reflect voluntary overtime after I and another analyst had specifically documented mandatory client cleanup duty on a Friday night. There it was, black and white. Forced overtime magically transformed into voluntary extra work, just to avoid paying time-and-a-half rates. I flagged 2 more instances where my PTO requests had been denied due to critical project deadlines, yet my vacation hours still mysteriously disappeared from my balance. Classic wage theft. Take the time, don't pay the premium, hope nobody notices. It was all there. It had always been there, but now someone had hit record. And Brandon had just escalated a simple payroll discrepancy into a federal labor violation with witnesses and audio evidence. At 5:13 p.m., I got an email that made my day. Subject line, "Still got that screenshot from 2022. Sender, Brody Sullivan, former analyst who'd left voluntarily last spring. I opened it immediately. Garrett, heard through the grapevine that Brandon's finally stepped in it. I kept documentation from my time there. Wage theft, hostile work environment, the works. Happy to share if you're building something bigger. Guy's a menace." I leaned back in my chair. This was better than I'd hoped. 1 recording was good. A pattern of behavior across multiple employees? That was a lawsuit waiting to happen. I clicked reply. Brody. Yes, very interested. Can we connect offline? This is bigger than just my situation. His response came within minutes, along with a forwarded email chain that made my blood pressure spike. It was Brandon, 2 years ago, discussing with HR how to encourage turnover among legacy employees who aren't adapting to our cultural evolution. Translation: how to get rid of older workers without technically firing them. The email thread was damning. Brandon advocating for performance improvement plans designed to fail, scheduling mandatory training during known vacation periods, and my personal favorite, suggesting that employees over 45 might benefit from external coaching to address resistance to change. Age discrimination. In writing, from 2 years ago, I saved everything to my encrypted drive and opened a new browser tab. Time to see what other former employees might have to say. LinkedIn search, Phoenix Financial Solutions, former employees, analyst level, Caleb Rodriguez, junior analyst who'd left suddenly after Brandon's public humiliation, now working at a competing firm. I sent him a direct message. Caleb, hope you're well in your new role. Question about your departure from Phoenix Financial. Were you documenting any issues with management practices? Asking for specific legal reasons. His response was immediate. Holy shit, Garrett. Yes, I kept everything. Brandon cost me 3 months of back pay and nearly destroyed my career reputation. I've been waiting for someone to finally take that bastard down. When can we talk? 2 down. How many more were out there? Around 6 p.m., Brandon finally worked up the courage to approach my cubicle. He looked like a man who'd just realized his parachute was made of tissue paper. Garrett, he said, trying to sound casual, maybe we got off on the wrong foot this morning. You know how it is. Lots of pressure from upstairs about productivity metrics. Nothing personal. I looked up from my screen, where I was currently reviewing Arizona labor law statutes. Brandon, I appreciate you coming over to clarify. For my records, are you rescinding the unpaid leave directive from this morning's meeting? His eyes darted around like he was looking for an escape route. Well, I mean, that was more of a suggestion. You know, sometimes we all need a break to recharge, get perspective. I reached casually into my bag and activated my phone's voice memo function. So, to be clear, the mandatory week of unpaid leave you announced in front of the team this morning is now a suggestion? I never said mandatory, he stammered. You're mischaracterizing the conversation. Interesting. I have the conversation recorded if you'd like to review your exact words. Brandon's face went white. You recorded me? Arizona is a one-party consent state, Brandon. As long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, which I did, it's perfectly legal. I thought you'd know that, being in a leadership position and all. He stood there for a full 10 seconds, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Finally, he managed, this conversation is over. Agreed, I said, ending the recording. Oh, and Brandon, you might want to check your company email. I think HR has some questions for you. He walked away like a man heading to his own execution, which, in a corporate sense, he probably was. At 7 p.m., I stayed late to finish what I'd started. Not the month-end reconciliation. That could wait. I was building something much more important. A comprehensive case file that would make even the most expensive corporate lawyer wet their pants. I opened a new folder on my personal drive. Phoenix Financial Labor Violations. Evidence package. It was time to get systematic about this. Spreadsheets, timelines, email threads, witness statements, everything organized like the military operation it had become. Brandon thought he was dealing with some cranky old employee who'd just roll over and take his abuse. What he'd actually done was declare war on someone who'd spent 20 years perfecting the art of strategic warfare. And I was just getting started. The next morning brought the kind of silence you only hear right before a storm hits. People were whispering near the water cooler. Slack channels that used to buzz with Brandon's motivational garbage had gone dead quiet. I noticed it the moment I stepped off the elevator. That electric tension when everyone knows something big is about to go down. Then came the text from an unknown number. Hi Garrett, this is Detective Martinez with Phoenix PD. We received a wellness check request from your employer. Are you available to speak today? I had to laugh. There it was. The oldest, dirtiest trick in the corporate playbook. When you can't bury someone with policy violations, you try to paint them as unstable, frame them as a potential threat. erode their credibility under the warm, fuzzy blanket of, "We're just concerned about his mental health." Brandon had called the cops on me, actually called the police to report that I might be a danger to myself or others. The sheer desperation of it was almost admirable. I called Detective Martinez immediately. "Officer, this is Garrett Caldwell. Yes, I'm at work. Yes, I'm completely fine. No, I'm not a danger to anyone unless you count incompetent management practices. Can you tell me who made this report?" "We can't disclose that, sir. It was a third-party concern relayed through your employer regarding potential workplace violence or self-harm." "Officer, I'm a 48-year-old Navy veteran with no history of violence or mental health issues. What you've been pulled into isn't a wellness check. It's retaliation disguised as concern. I've filed formal complaints about labor violations, and now my supervisor is trying to discredit me." There was a pause. "Well, okay then. Thanks for clearing that up, sir. Have a good day." I hung up and immediately documented the call. Time, date, officer's name, the whole conversation. Then I forwarded the call log to my personal attorney. Yeah, I'd already retained legal counsel. 20 years in the Navy teaches you to prepare for battle before the shooting starts. At 11:34 a.m., an HR calendar invite hit my inbox. Subject: Garrett. Check-in: Team Dynamics and Support Resources. Attendees: HR Manager, me. Optional attendee: Brandon Hayes. Location: Conference Room B. I declined the meeting and replied in writing, "Thank you for the invitation. Given that this request follows a false police wellness check initiated without my consent, and considering that I've already provided clear documentation regarding recent management violations, I'm not comfortable participating without legal representation present. Please forward any concerns to my attorney copied here." I CC'd my lawyer on the response. Her name was Patricia Williams, and she specialized in employment law. First consultation had cost me $300. By the end of this mess, it would be the best money I'd ever spent. The HR response came within 20 minutes. "Understood. We'll postpone pending further discussion. Please take whatever time you need." Translation: "We saw the cliff edge and we're backing up real slow." Brandon didn't come out of his office all day. At 4:17 p.m., I passed him in the hallway. His eyes were wild behind his designer glasses. He opened his mouth like he might say something, probably some last-ditch attempt at reconciliation, but I didn't stop. Just walked past him with the full weight of my quiet determination wrapped in professionalism. By Wednesday, the investigation was in full swing. I'd submitted my formal complaint to the Arizona Department of Labor, complete with audio recordings, email threads, witness statements from Brody and Caleb, and a timeline of violations stretching back over 2 years. The Labor Board moved fast. Within a week, they'd interviewed 6 current and former employees. Turns out Brandon's little empire of incompetence had left quite a trail. Unpaid overtime, manipulated timesheets, age discrimination, retaliation against whistleblowers. The guy had managed to violate just about every employment law on the books. The company's legal team went into full damage control mode. They hired an external auditing firm to review all payroll records for the past 3 years. What they found made their insurance company very nervous. Systematic wage theft affecting dozens of employees. Age-based discrimination in performance reviews and terminations. A culture of retaliation that started at the management level and infected the entire department. Brandon lasted exactly 23 days after my initial complaint. On a Thursday morning, I watched through the conference room glass as the CFO, legal counsel, and HR delivered the news. Brandon's face went through every stage of grief in about 30 seconds. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, all playing out in real time behind soundproof glass. Security escorted him out that afternoon. No farewell email, no transition period, just gone. Sydney followed 3 days later. Voluntary resignation to pursue other opportunities. They cleaned house fast once the lawyers started talking settlement numbers. The final settlement took 4 months to negotiate, $435,000 split between back wages, penalties, and damages. My share was $127,000. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to eat his sandwich in peace. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was watching a broken system finally work the way it was supposed to. Brandon thought he could bully his way through a career, trading on connections instead of competence. He learned the hard way that some fights aren't worth picking. I used my settlement money to start operational compliance consulting, helping companies avoid the exact legal nightmare Brandon had created. My tagline: experience isn't obsolete, incompetence is. 6 months later, Phoenix Financial Solutions implemented new management training, anonymous reporting systems, and regular compliance audits. They asked me to stay on as a senior advisor. I declined. I had better things to do than babysit their cleanup operation. Sometimes the best revenge is just doing your job properly and letting idiots hang themselves with their own rope. Brandon handed me that rope on a silver platter. I just made sure it was strong enough to hold the weight of his arrogance. Justice isn't always swift, but when it comes, it's thorough. And sometimes, if you're patient enough and smart enough, you get to watch the whole thing unfold from the front row.